Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. My name is Anja Berg. I'm your host, and today I am here with Kristi Wells. She is the co-founder and CEO of Safe House Project. Hi, Kristi. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
To have you. Can you please talk about what exactly Safe House Project is?
Yeah, so Safe House Project is a national anti-trafficking organization that works to combat domestic sex trafficking. So we are an organization that works to increase victim identification through education. We work to help survivors escape their trafficking situation and get them placed into safe houses. And then we help fund, mentor, and launch new safe houses across America. And then we also work really heavily on the policy side in DC and across other states to help ensure that legislators have the effective information that they need to create effective policies to combat trafficking.
Wow, really impressive. One question. I think there is a lot of misconception about what sex trafficking is, right? I always think there's like a Hollywood version where people imagine someone gets like shoved in a van and driven across state borders.
Right.
Can you explain what the reality is, and if that is the reality or what the reality looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I lived in San Diego and people would hear what I did, they would go, "Oh my gosh, you live so close to the border. Aren't you afraid that somebody is going to grab your child and run across to Mexico?" And my answer was no. When I'm more concerned about the people that are interacting with my kids. I'm more concerned about predators coming into our home without ever walking through our front door because they can access our children online. And so sex trafficking, simply put, is the commercial sexual exploitation of an individual through force, through fraud, or through coercion. However, if a child is being sold for commercial sex, that is considered sex trafficking because a child is inherently vulnerable and there's no such thing as a child prostitute. So in many cases, there's the argument that there's a lot of people who believe in sex workers, that this is, you'll hear men talk about, I heard men last night talking about going to the strip club because they're going to pay her way through college. Well, the fact of the matter is most of the people that are in what is perceived to be sex work are actually being trafficked. Nobody asked them if they want to be there. Nobody asked them, hey, is somebody forcing you? Is somebody holding your money, your IDs, your children to get you to do this? What are you forced to make a certain amount of money in order to eat? Nobody's asking them those questions. And so most of the people that are engaged in sex work are being trafficked.
And what about the trauma bound of the victim?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of psychological use at play, right? Can you explain about the trauma bond and why it is so hard for these girls to leave?
Yeah, so traffickers exploit a vulnerability, and if you think of a young girl in an unhealthy relationship who has somebody, the best way to describe it is a young girl who may be sitting at home, doesn't have a lot of friends. She's online. Somebody reaches out to her, says, "You're beautiful. You should be a model," and starts to build a relationship with her, tells her she's loved, works to figure out what those things are that she doesn't have, whether it is love, money, attention, a stable home life, whatever that is, that trafficker will then begin to promise that and build that bond so that they think, oh my gosh, this person really loves me. This person really understands me better than anybody else. And then over time, they'll begin to say, hey, I want you to be with me. I want us to build this life. But in order for you to do that, I need you to do this. Mm-hmm. And there's those relationships are built on, a feeling of being loved, but also a little bit of fear. That person can snap at them and make them go, oh gosh, I want to do everything I can to keep them happy. And so these trauma bonds start to be built. And it's what we've always heard called Stockholm syndrome. And so when victims go to leave their trafficker, they're sometimes they feel like they're leaving somebody who cares for them, is the only person that actually gets them, even though that person is abusive, even though that person is selling them. They tell them that if they leave, nobody is going to get them. Nobody's going to understand. And so the first sign that they encounter that somebody doesn't understand what they've been through, somebody, is maybe trying to get them to operate a certain way, they go, oh no, that's exactly what the trafficker said, or my boyfriend said that it was going to be like, and so they go back to them. We have survivors that we've helped escape. It's a very real thing. We have one that was trafficked by her family. She still, she just almost couldn't resist it and went back home and was sold again and said, okay, now I understand that this is problematic. Or they will get out, they'll be away from their trafficker and they'll leave and they'll go back because my mom always says it's easier to stay in the hell of a predictable situation than risk the joy of an unpredictable one. And so while traffickers are awful, they're also a known awful. And the fear sometimes of stepping out on their own and doing the hard work of healing that's joy, but they have to risk that joy. And it's very uncomfortable at times.
So especially the online predators, what do you think can parents or anyone, how can we monitor what's happening? Do you have any tools to keep an eye on, like you described that girl earlier who's at home by herself with her phone? Like, how can we look out for that?
Yeah, so online exploitation and recruitment increased by about 98% during COVID. Maybe it was 96%.
Wow.
High percentage. Because again, kids were home, they were online, they weren't being monitored by family. But we have some friends over at a company called Bark that have created an incredible tool. It's an app that parents can download on their device and then on the kids' devices. And what it does is it spiders out. You'll have to get the logins for each of the apps, but then it spiders out and it monitors them. And it doesn't just monitor them for grooming behavior of traffickers. It looks for sexual content. It looks for violence. It looks for bullying. It looks for suicidal ideations, any of those things. So Bark has actually been a tool that's been really effective in stopping school shootings and stopping predators. And so that is the number one tool. I tell every single parent, download Bark. And actually, I'm going to email the CEO to see if he can send me a couple of phones for our gala because they just launched their own phone.
I'm going to make sure I put it in the notes of this episode so parents can look into it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then what age do you recommend talking to your children about? Because we all explain our kids stranger danger, and I do talk to my kids about online safety, but sometimes I'm not sure how to approach it because so many things they obviously are not aware of at all. So I don't want to bring something to their attention that they, are too young, or how do you talk about it? And at what age do you talk about all this?
I would say the second your kids are online in any capacity, whether it's watching YouTube, whether it is having access to Discord, which by the way, is one of the number one tool that predators are using to go after kids.
Really? Discord?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
So if they're on video games, so our boys, the only safe house in the nation right now for boys, every single one of those boys, their trafficker found them through Call of Duty, through Discord, through not Minecraft,
Fortnite,
and then there was one other one. So that is where the traffickers were finding them and grooming them, and before they were ever trafficked. And so online safety is critical. And so having those conversations early for my kids, again, I can let my kids go and run around the neighborhood and I can tell them to come home when the street lights come on. And I am less concerned than I am about them being up in their room on their iPad, having access to communications with strangers. So we actually do not allow any communications with anybody that I do not personally know. And that's because the way that predators will work on some of these apps is that they'll send a friend's request to 40 kids in the same middle school. Well, you've got a few of them that will accept, and then they'll send it to more of them and they go, oh, well, Johnny and Susie are friends with them. And so I must know them. And so they'll eventually find their way into these chat groups, into Discord groups where these kids think they're in there with their peers, and they will look for somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who's being bullied. And they will then begin to pull them aside in a conversation. Nobody gets you. I'm so sorry. I want to be your friend. And that's how that begins. My sons were in a group the other day. They said, I don't know, we just got put into this group with all of these kids that we don't know. Said, nope, we're out.
Scary. It's really scary stuff. Yeah.
Right. So predators, I talk about good pictures, bad pictures. We talk about, because predators will send pornography and say, do you know what to do with this? Or do you know how to do this? Or I will pay you money to do this. And so I try to make sure that they understand that what happens or what is being said to them is not their fault, and it is not something to be ashamed of. And so because they, it feels uncomfortable. And so then they think, oh gosh, I got this message, and so I must have been doing something wrong. And so making sure that they know that it's not their fault, that there are predators out there, that messages can come through, that if they do, they need to let us know. We talk about images that can be sent to them or that they can see through ads that are just grooming tactics. The normalization of pornography in children's ads is horrific. And so that's something that we talk about, because that's something that has become a social norm that I think is there to push those things on our kids.
So I saw on your website that you have this training.
Mm-hmm.
So what is this training all about, and who should go ahead and take the training?
Yeah, so we developed a training during COVID. My co-founder and I were training about 10,000 people in person every year. And then COVID happened and that shut down. But what we realized was how valuable it was to create that tool digitally with survivors. So On Watch is an online video-based training. It's 1 hour long. It's 10 5-minute modules with some additional modules that you can watch as well. And they educate you on the signs and indicators of trafficking. And it's done not just it's not death by PowerPoint, but it's using survivor stories. So survivors that we work with were courageous enough to share their stories and their intersection points with community members and the signs and indicators that were present during their trafficking situation. And we found that when we can explain trafficking through those real life scenarios, it allows us to see that same thing when it's playing out in somebody else's life. And so it is an incredible tool. It's free. It's at iamonwatch.org. And really, we recommend that any parent, any teacher, any coach take that training, because the fact of the matter is there's an average of 300,000 American kids that are trafficked in the United States every year. And it had been that victim identification was at 1%, but I was at the United Nations last week, and the latest reports that we have show that we're going in the wrong direction. Trafficking has increased, trafficking reports are down, which means we are at 0.32% of victim identification. So training is a pivotal piece for us to identify these kids in our communities.
Yeah, because it sounds like it's everywhere. It's not like, a lot of times you think this is not happening in my community, this is not in my neighborhood, right? But reality is, with these numbers, it's probably happening all around us. Question for the training: do you think like teenagers would be too young to take the training, or?
No, definitely not. Teenagers are a great audience to take the training as well. It's not geared at them, but it is absolutely something that they can take.
Okay. Talking about survivors.
Mm-hmm.
So what do these survivors need to feel empowered once they get out of the situation? Like, what are the steps that you have to take to?
Yeah. So when we get them out of a trafficking situation, what we do is, as best we can, put them into what we call a continuum of care. And so that starts with an emergency safe house, which is where we're really hitting Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is, let's get you clothes, let's get you food, let's get you shelter, let's get you rest. And then start figuring out what you want your next steps to be. You know, if you're a kiddo, what was your last point, or even an adult, what was your last point of education? What are the things that maybe you want to do when they have a chance to breathe? What are your goals? But most of them, you know, if they've been trafficked since a young age, they don't know. They don't know what they want those life experiences to be, but we can at least get them stabilized. Then we can get them placed into a long-term safe house. A long-term safe house is usually about 4 to 6 women or children in a home together, with house guardians who are there, you know, on shift work. And so usually 8-hour shifts. They are getting education. They are getting life skills training. They are getting therapy. They're getting equine therapy and art therapy, and then all of the different trauma-based therapies that are so necessary to heal from the trauma that they've endured. And so they'll go through those from anywhere from 6 to 12 and sometimes 18 months, depending on the program, depending on what the survivor needs to get back on their feet. Mm-hmm. And what's really exciting is really towards the end of that long-term safe house and then going into the transitional safe house is really that focus on economic empowerment and independence, because at the end of the day, finances are the thing that can still make them vulnerable to going back to trafficking. And so if they don't have their basic needs met or a way to meet their basic needs, then that's going to be really difficult. And so because the trafficker might have provided something. So getting them, again, job skills, interview training, getting them placed into their first job, giving them the housing stability to maybe pay $300 in rent in a safe house and start working towards having a job. And then they're paying in the rent, but that rent is actually ends up being a nest egg for them. So the programs give it back to them when they leave. So they have $10,000 in savings and they can really leave on a solid footing.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you guys get the funding from for all these programs?
Yeah, so we get funding from donors largely. We work a lot with corporate America that funds our work. One of our trainings is a healthcare training that we wrote with the Academy of Forensic Nursing and a team of survivors to educate healthcare workers on how to identify and respond to trafficking in a healthcare setting. And so we're seeing the American Nurses Association just made it their human trafficking training of choice. But that is one that we sell into healthcare networks and we use to monetize. And then those dollars are redistributed towards building up the safe houses and helping survivors escape. So corporations, donors, healthcare training, all different ways that we, and then events. We've got a gala coming up here in Virginia, or we just had one in Virginia. We've got one coming up here in North Carolina soon. So those are always fun ways to raise money. That's
great. Yeah, I'm going to make sure I put all your information, where people can donate, where they can find you in the notes. I read something last night that was disturbing, but to be honest, not really surprising to me, but I want to make sure it's a fact. So I read that the Super Bowl, the RNC and the DNC are the 3 biggest human trafficking events in the United States. Is that fact or fiction?
That's fact. That's fact. But I will add to that those are the ones that we have eyes on. And so that is where we're tracking it. However, any major sporting event is going to drive, I mean, the Kentucky Derby, there was just a major golf tournament here in Charlotte, that those are, anytime, unfortunately, you've got a large group of men, especially around some kind of sporting event or something like that, that is where trafficking can happen. I even talked to a safe house program I think it was in South Dakota, and we were talking about what type of trafficking they see. And they said, well, with the dove hunts here, it's a major problem. And I said, the dove hunts? They said, well, yeah, men will come out to some of these ranches to do dove hunting. And then that is where they're trafficking the girls, is on these ranches. And I thought, oh my gosh, just really anywhere you get a large contingency of men, it can happen. And it's, so those are major events, but the fact is it's happening at all of those.
Yeah. So I know when did you start the foundation, the Project Safe House, like a couple of years ago?
So we are 5 years old.
Okay.
And we launched this organization in 2017. There were some elements of it that started in 2016. A lot of people don't know it actually began with a friend of ours, Nigel, who is a Christian hip hop artist. He had gone to South Africa and seen a need to build up a safe house for girls that were at risk of trafficking. He came back and was ready and was launching an album called Safe House, where he pulled in a bunch of Grammy artists, and it was this compilation album with a bunch of hip hop artists. I jumped in to run the PR for this because I'd seen trafficking internationally in Costa Rica when I was 16, which was one of those kind of aha moments for me. My co-founder jumped in to help. And as we all started raising money, people started to say, that's great, but what are you going to do here? And we didn't have an answer. And, my co-founder and I both were in varying areas of corporate America. Our military spouses, we move all the time. And we thought, what do you mean? What are we going to do? And so but we decided to become students of the industry. And that was where we saw that the Department of Justice had issued a report stating that there were 300,000 American kids trafficked in the United States every year. Victim identification at that point was at 1%. And then without a safe place to go, once they are rescued or once they exit, 80% would end up back in traffickers' hands. And at that point in America, we only had 100 beds in safe houses for minors across America, which is why we work to increase victim identification through education. We work to bridge that gap to make sure survivors get the services that they need once they exit. And then we help increase that capacity to ensure that there are more beds so that every survivor has equitable access to care.
I mean, you must wake up and feel so good to be involved in this kind of work, like really making an impact. I mean, it's such an important work that needs to be done, right? But I'm curious, like, where did you find the courage and the confidence as a mom of 3 with a deployed spouse to take this on?
I don't know if it was courage and confidence or stupidity. But I think there's just, for me and my co-founder, it came from a place of faith of felt like that was something that God was really calling us to do. But the fact is, we saw something we couldn't unsee. We asked the question, who's going to respond to it? There was so much disjoining. The industry, the anti-trafficking industry, was very disjointed, and there wasn't centralized communication. There wasn't centralized resources. There were a lot of things that were happening that made us go, well, we can do it. And the reason we launched Safe House Project nationally was because as military spouses who have lived all across the United States, military spouses, in my opinion, are some of the most highly educated, unemployed group of people because they move all the time, and the women oftentimes can't maintain those careers. But so we've started building the team with other military spouses. We said, we're going to build a national network. We had, there was a third gal with us. So we had 3 husbands deployed and 7 children under the age of 7. So that's definitely the time. And one of them had a 2-week-old. And so, like I said, there was some insanity in all of this, but the national organization was because that was actually made more sense than building it up in one community when all of us knew we were going to be moving shortly after we launched.
Yeah, I'm amazed, and brave women you're surrounded by. It's really, really cool. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for all you do. It's such an important work, and I hope we can turn these numbers around and make some change. Yeah, I will definitely post and share and hopefully spread more awareness.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you having me on, and to all of your listeners, thank you for taking the time to listen. Definitely go on, take the On Watch training, equip yourself to be part of the movement to eradicate human trafficking in America.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.